Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and we are returning to a book, Walt. We're talking about a book. Can you believe it? We haven't done a book in many months. Has it been a year? I don't know if it's a year, but it's been quite a long time.
I have no idea. I really don't remember the last.
It might have been. Is it possible that it was the Moxley book?
No.
There must have been something in between. But that was, I would say the Moxley book to me feels like the last, and I've not looked at our archives enough to remember this, awesometruth.libsyn.com. But the Moxley book, I feel like, was the last high-profile wrestling book we covered that had this sort of cachet and aura around it, I feel like.
Well, I feel like you should start setting up the book we are going to talk about while I look back in the archives to see what the last book was.
Yes.
Because now I'm just painfully curious.
Please do. But we are back to the book, the written word. It's definitely the wrestling. Well, I guess the Rousey book, parts of it might compete, but I would say this is probably the wrestling book of 2024. The title is very complicated. It's Becky Lynch, The Man, Not Your Average Girl. And Amazon has it, Becky Lynch, The Man, Not Your Average Girl.
That's the whole title?
That's the full title of the book, yes.
That's a lot.
And it's like you could tell they were like, okay, Rebecca, like, you got to put Becky Lynch in big letters at the top of the cover. Like, we can't not have that. And then The Man is also a thing, your gimmick, so please put that there. And then also, if you want to call it Not Your Average Girl, you can tuck that at the bottom. You know? That could be your title, Becky, but everything else we need you to put at the top so we can sell some books.
All right, so I have the actual. Sorry.
Okay, no. That was your task.
The last
please.
book we read was May 10th of last year. Ringmaster, Vince McMahon, and the Unmaking of America.
Oh, of course, and Josie came on.
That's yep.
So Josie, so that book, the Vince McMahon book, and Mox was the one before it. I guess maybe they're right because the Mox book was maybe 2 years ago now. So. But really, we honestly do, and this is probably fair, one big book a year, you know, and like if you look at wrestling books, you know, their frequency, I would say one book a year comes out that does sort of grab people and make people go, hey, a wrestling book we should all read. And I think this fits that bill.
And the one before that was Follow the Buzzards, Pro Wrestling in the Age of COVID-19.
Oh, wow.
Keith Elliott Greenberg,
yeah,
of course.
So. Friend of the show.
Yeah. So we'll do every book Keith comes out with, and then another one a year.
Yes. Well, so we do it infrequently. It was the conceit of the show. We've done a lot of episodes. It's sort of the landscape has changed, but we're back to the written word, Walt. And this book again is a big deal. Becky Lynch, even more of a big deal now, given that she's a free agent. You know, probably will return to WWE at some point, but in theory could go anywhere. So this is a good time, I think, to be talking about Becky Lynch and her contributions to wrestling.
Well, as we've learned, she's already scratched the New Japan, or I guess not New Japan, but the Japan itch.
Yeah, as like a teen, which I did not know.
Yeah, and so I don't foresee her, needing to have this creative and freedom to express herself in different promotions around the world.
Especially with a kid, that seems like it would be a young child. That's a lot.
Hasn't really stopped Moxley, though, speaking of Moxley books, from doing that very same thing.
I get the sense that Moxley sort of does whatever he wants, you know, and that Renee seems like a very nurturing and loving wife who's like, whatever you need to do, John, you know, like, go get him.
Yeah, meanwhile, Becky and Seth to have like a tour bus for their child because they don't want to leave her for any length of time.
Another revelation from this book near the end is that Becky and Seth travel on a bus with their kid everywhere, which as someone who has a young child, that sounds insane to me. I cannot imagine what that kid's nap schedule was like. I can't imagine. It sounds kind of fun, and I guess you can get used to anything, but that is an insane choice from my perspective.
Well, I guess you save on hotel rooms and you save on like rental cars.
And if you travel, I say they travel, I believe, with, they said, a nanny, right? So like you sort of need somewhere for everyone to stay. So it does, I'm sure it makes logistical sense and probably financial sense. But yeah, just the upheaval of all that is a wild. But if mom and dad are going to be gone 4 or 5 days a week, like what are you going to do? You really kind of got to do it.
Right. Otherwise, you have to pay a babysitter in your hometown, in like Nashville or wherever. Yeah.
Yeah, which is insane.
Anyway, so we're going too far ahead.
We are.
There's obviously a lot of book before that. That's literally the last 10 pages.
Yes, that is a very end of book type thing. But so let's get overall thoughts on this book, Walt, before we get too deep into it. I will say from my perspective, I think Becky Lynch is a great character on WWE programming. She is a trailblazer and arguably the biggest. We can talk about that. I think that's a great question for the end is her ranking in terms of WWE or wrestling women's stars across the board. I will say this book, it's if you look at the reviews, the Goodreads, the Amazon, it is almost 5 stars, masterpiece status. I think that's a little wild. I think this is a very entertaining and personality, like one of those books where the personality comes out, which you talked about a lot. Like it's always nice when you feel like someone actually wrote these words or at least was involved heavily in the writing of them. But I cannot rank this anywhere near the top tier of the books we've talked about on this show.
Yeah, I mean that was going to be the one big note I had, but well, not note, but just like positive is like it does feel like this was in her voice, which sometimes really does get lost when you have ghostwriters and editors, etc. So definitely a big. As a result, it felt very easy to read, and it felt like she was talking to you versus like you're reading a book, if that makes sense.
Yes, agreed.
So good. Yay. Hooray.
Yeah, very much good. but that's not the whole story.
I agree with you, though. Like, this is certainly not the best wrestling book I've ever read. Is it top 10? I mean, I don't think so. But maybe I am misremembering other wrestling books. Or maybe I take for granted the fact that, like, it's just really the same, like unless you're really breaking the mold like Moxley, or you're going so deep like Ring of Hell in exploring this uncharted territory and journalistic, it's like I don't know, it's another wrestling book and we're kind of getting the same like Wikipedia highlights.
Well, I mean, I hate to do this because it is sort of lazy, but I think the only other book we've covered by a female wrestler is Crazy is My Superpower by AJ Lee. And by AJ Mendez. Her wrestling name is AJ Lee. I think that book is better than this book. How do you compare the two?
You think this book's better than
No, I think Crazy is My Superpower is better.
Oh, yeah, okay. I agree with that.
From what I remember. That was a long time ago. That was literally, 6 years ago at this point, maybe? You have the archives open still?
No, I minimized it.
Well, it was one of the first books we covered in our archives. It was by AJ Mendez, known as AJ Lee. And I think that's just a better book. That's another book written in someone's voice, very distinct, very clearly produced by that person. And, neither of these books do they throw gossip out there or talk about the beefs they have. They are both written to entertain, to provide the biography of a person's life, talk about their trials and tribulations, how they got to where they are. But AJ's book is just, I remember being very candid about her struggles, as Becky's book was to a certain extent. AJ's book is very candid about her struggles with mental health and how she came to the business. But I don't know, AJ's book felt like a cohesive book, like there was a purpose to it. It existed for a reason. She set out to write it, to tell her story, to be honest and open about all the things that have transpired in her life. Becky's book feels like a book that she wrote because someone asked her to write a book, which she sort of talks about in the book. So I don't think that's even idle speculation on my part. She's kind of clear. Someone came up to her when she became pretty famous and was like, "Hey, you want to write a book?" Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comparison point because, because there is parallels with this girl talked about her struggles with eating disorders growing up and how that impacted her just overall health and how there's a rawness to what she shared and why and how that impacted her life, but there's also a lot with Becky, I should say. I mean, both of them were very raw, but I think the difference though is I feel like she was very open about certain things that I didn't expect there to be conversation about. But then there's other stuff that really befuddled me. I'm just she keeps talking about how she had kind of lost it. She's like, she always felt like she couldn't wrestle. And I'm like, at what point to the thing that where you were wrestling? And I'm like, and tell me why specifically you felt like you couldn't wrestle. Because like saying to me, a pedestrian or a civilian or a fan, whatever you want to categorize me, that like, oh, I lost it. I couldn't, I felt like I couldn't do it. I was shite. I'm like, but what does that mean? Because I have the interpretation of that, and her being a wrestler probably has a very different interpretation of that. I need something more than just I struggled with confidence, if that makes sense.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think that is a big, and I hate to nitpick that because Rebecca Quinn, the human being, she's very good at her job and she's achieved great success, and she's obviously been through a lot in terms of her own personal experiences and such. So like, I don't want to, I hate to nitpick someone's personal struggles and how they relay them because that is hard to do. But I will say, as a comparison point again, AJ seems very thoughtful about it in a way that maybe Becky is not, I think maybe AJ is the kind of person who's maybe spent even more time dissecting her own issues and diagramming them and figuring them out and overcoming them in that way, whereas Becky seems like more of the person who had them and suffered from them, and then through hard work and circumstance and timing and all the other things has overcome them and refound her confidence and become good again, And I think it's just probably a difference of how their brains work and how the kind of people they are. But AJ's version and AJ's life, I think, is just better suited for a book, Like, it's easier to tell that story. It's easier for AJ to explain her feelings and how she overcame them. Whereas Becky, it might be a little more innate, It might just be more, I don't really know, I struggled with this and I couldn't really figure it out, and then I took a decade off, and when I came back I found my confidence again. Like, that is probably true and her own earned honest experience, but it just doesn't, in terms of words on the page, it doesn't really work the same way.
Yeah, and maybe it's a matter of articulation too, where AJ seems a little bit better spoken and was able to kind of like really voice her journey like that.
Yeah.
To me, though, the way the information is presented, it's like, I'm a failure. I main evented WrestleMania, and maybe that's and like, like
that is kind of
like it raises two thoughts in my head, and I don't know if we can talk about whether you agree with this or not. But like, one is just like, I mean, that's the first thought. Is just like we just like stumbled our way backwards and ended up like succeeding, and it's really tough for me to like just to understand, but it's very similar to like when you're reading Ric Flair's book, that guy's talking about how he loses confidence, and I'm like, dude, you're like literally considered the best wrestler of all time. What's going on here? I mean, in his case, it was very specific. It was Eric Bischoff made me feel really bad about myself, and therefore I've lost confidence. For Becky, it was just like, I don't think she could even articulate what it was. But through that parallel of Ric Flair and Becky Lynch, I'm also like, led me to start thinking like, how often do these people, like, are these people just the most neurotic, self-conscious people in the world? And they're not to like make light of it, but it's just like, if those two people are saying this about themselves, like, how much does everybody else feel that way or more?
Yeah, I mean, no, again, you're right that it's probably not the best thing to diagnose a bunch of wrestlers' mental health, but It does seem like this maybe this weird mix of, alpha dog athletic prowess. No, though not everyone who gets into wrestling is necessarily athletic, but a lot of people certainly come from those backgrounds. So there's just a competitive nature, locker room, people competing for a spot type thing. But then also, obviously, Becky literally was trying to be an actor. There's a lot of that there too, where like you have to be in touch with your emotions to a certain extent, like you have to be in touch with that side of you, that creative side of you, to not just go out there and perform, but to perform with like a purpose and a character and a story and all that kind of stuff. So perhaps it's those things are just like, I don't want to say toxic, but like complicated, because you're coming at it from all these different angles, and maybe you're just predisposed to being a little more emotional or a little more, I don't want to say fragile, but but just prone to maybe some ups and downs that maybe if you're just a straight up meathead playing a sport, you're just maybe not the kind of person who thinks about those things or worries about those things so much as a wrestler might.
Maybe it's just a function. Now I'm just like,
yeah, we're just
like, not well, but I'm not. I don't mean to sound aimless, but like, this is an interesting conversation because for a number of reasons. Because it's like, Becky is a unique performer in the sense that like not many women have written books about this, because not many women have ever been important enough to write a book about their wildly successful professional wrestling career. I mean, I'm gonna wait for that siren to. You can keep this in. You can wait for that siren to go. But like, yeah, I mean, if Sherry Martel wrote a book, it's like, yeah, I was so important. And I had like all of these emotions and thoughts being a manager, or like keep going, like Lita, Alundra Blaze. Like, none of these women can say they ever had a career like Becky Lynch, and I put that like Charlotte, Sasha, all of the new generation of female talent, but like, it's such a unique situation where like we actually don't know what that person is going through, because it's like, yeah, we know a bunch of like meathead males who've main evented and probably have a mix of emotions similar to Becky, but like also the female perspective of a main eventing WrestleMania is truly something that has never been captured on book or otherwise.
Yeah, you're right. She's incredibly unique, and that's why I think it is exciting to read this book and to get her perspective, because she's done things that no woman has ever done. And like you said, there is, like, Charlotte and Ronda are in that match, obviously, and can take credit for being involved. Becky's the winner of that match, and I don't think anyone would deny that Becky is the chief female talent of that era, of her era, So congratulations, other two women in that match, but like your afterthoughts ultimately in the history books, because this one won, and this one is the one who gets to write the book and tell the story, But right. One thing I will say that I think does sort of coincidentally or otherwise tie into how Becky tells her story, once Becky becomes the man as a character and sort of adopts that as her persona, it all sort of slides into place. And like the Nia punching her thing, the stuff with Ronda, that really rockets her to a whole other level. But before that, Becky's success, and I remember this in watching wrestling at that point, it didn't really make a lot of sense. Like, it wasn't like Sasha was this heel, I'm the boss. Like, Sasha had a defined character. Bayley was this super defined babyface at that point, just like white meat as hell. And then Charlotte was just a flair, and that everything that came with that, good and bad. But Becky was sort of just, oh, there's this other, very attractive woman with, a striking hair and like dresses like a steampunk and has great theme. But otherwise, there wasn't like a character there, But people seemed to get behind her regardless of whether she had sort of a reason to be at the top. Like, she was sort of this phenomenon for a little while, pre-defined character, where everyone liked her just for reasons that I couldn't even particularly articulate either. But I remember thinking like, oh, Becky's cool, like she's good, like she's she's talented obviously, and she's interesting and she stands out. But I couldn't tell you like why. Whereas with the other women, whether I liked them or didn't like them, much easier to formulate an opinion on them. So it sort of makes a little bit of sense that she can't really put it into words either, because I don't think anybody watching her in like 2018 could really tell you why they liked Becky Lynch so much.
I mean, it truly is a phenomenon, because her career did have a relatively sizable lull with regards. I'm talking main event WWE career. I mean, obviously she had like a hiatus early in her career, which we can unpack that a lot too. But like for a while before the man gimmick really took off, she was around, and it's not like it was Daniel Bryan where the crowd took over and demanded that she be in the spotlight. I think it's like when people forgot about her, and then before she went heel on Charlotte in that SummerSlam, and they teased her in the Money in the Bank, everyone's like, oh yeah, she's around, and I forgot how much I like her. And that's very rare in wrestling, where people will just, like, Kofi is a great example of that, where it's like you're just around, and people always like Kofi, but then it's like you give them a tease of like, yeah, this guy, you deserve it, but like, I just like ignited with Becky in a way that was just, I truly can't define it, but I think she was always someone that people really gravitated towards, and then when like you put her on the shelf for a little bit and then put her back on the main event, I think at that point people just like had to will it into existence to the nth degree and make her like effectively the main event.
Yeah, and like the one thing I will say, touching on Kofi and thinking about Kofi, even though it's not, I think, an exact comparison point, what made the Kofi thing so great too is that Daniel Bryan understood the assignment extremely well, and played the other side of that so perfectly. And I don't think Charlotte is as good as Daniel Bryan at that sort of wrestling element for sure, but I do think Charlotte was a really great foe for Becky. Even like when Becky talks about the Evolution last woman standing match they had, which is just like Charlotte was just almost this guaranteed top of the card presence no matter what, like of course Charlotte's going to be there, but then Becky I think just becomes this sort of natural plucky underdog just by dint of being near Charlotte, being around Charlotte, coming up with Charlotte. It was just like, well, of course they're going to naturally be foes, and then it's unfortunate for them that they stop being friends because of all that. But in terms of wrestling characters, like it was just such a good fit for Becky, even though I don't think of Becky Charlotte as like this great feud, like I believe on that Feuds show, whatever the hell it was called, they did Charlotte versus Sasha, right? That was like the feud that people in theory think about, and that was the one that did Hell in the Cell, and like that is technically a bigger deal. But I think just in terms of Becky's ascendance, it just really helped to have Charlotte there as this sort of roadblock impediment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Charlotte versus anyone comparison is always going to draw like underdog inspired narrative.
Yeah.
Just because of who Charlotte is.
And she's taller than everybody pretty much, so it's like, well, you're going to be a literal underdog, just standing next to her. So
yeah, but I think that even Becky even articulates it or intimates just like the fact that it's like, yes, but Sasha was also equally a huge star in her own right. And again, Sasha gets walked out in WrestleMania by like Snoop Dogg, and Becky, her mom couldn't even get a ride to the stadium for her main. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that. Maybe there's something there. Maybe it's like, yeah, well, but it's not Charlotte. So, but there's still a level of like relatability with Becky. I just find it really interesting. quick aside that like, to your point earlier that she doesn't have a character. It's like, could you imagine if like Sheamus became the most popular wrestler in the world? Like that's kind of like what I think about. Like, yeah, she's just like an Irish lad.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So is Sheamus. They kicked last. Like what if Sheamus became like unbelievably popular to the point where he's like the highest selling merch seller, and like I can't imagine that being a scenario.
No, you're right.
Why is the opposite true?
Well, the thing about Becky that is just that, I mean, we'll see when that next. Like, I guess Rhea's got to be the closest comparison at this current day and age, right? Like, Becky still wrestles, but like Rhea's the top female star now, right?
I mean,
I guess Bianca. So. Like, is Bianca
the other
was
one? For a minute. Bianca was for a bit. I mean, Jade might usurp them at some point.
But I would have to say Rhea. To me, Rhea's number one, especially because Rhea has like a defined thing to do. Like. Rhea's been very involved in like storylines that have purpose for a while now, which is still for women not always the case. So like beyond like I'm gonna fight you for the belt or whatever, So, but what I will say about Becky, why I think Becky's rise to the top is so unique and gonna be fascinating to see when someone else gets that big again. As I think wrestling fans, like there had been the whole give divas a chance. There was a clear delineation at that point, like women wrestling is important. WWE is going to care about this, and we're going to promote all these women from NXT that are really good, and we're going to give them 15-20 minutes, and like they're going to matter on the shows. But there hadn't been a character, like I said, Sasha was a big deal, Charlotte was a big deal, but I think I think everyone was waiting, like, give me something new, you know? Give me something different. Give me like a bolt of lightning. And I think Becky, when that time came with the Nia punch and just like with everything around that, like she grabbed it and ran with it. And I think like Vince, to his credit, back in the day before he was ousted for being a monster, like said, push her to the moon, you know, like let's run with this. Like it wasn't the organic Kofi thing, like you said, where the fans demanded necessarily. It was the office being like, we're gonna put Becky in these main events, and like we see what's happening here, and we're gonna run with it, and like we're gonna of course do our McMahon thing too, which is like get Vince involved, get Stephanie involved,
Right.
which risks slowing it down and grinding it to a halt. But I do think Becky just was right place, right time. Not that she's not talented, but like it was the perfect storm of like someone like Sasha and Charlotte came up with these characters who, and now amongst these women is going to do something new, you know? And I feel like Becky was the first one to really go out there with something new, and everyone just loved it, and it was just off to the races from there.
Two thoughts I'm going to make that related to what you just said. One is, I don't know if I agree with the fact that the crowd did hijack many shows. And she says it in the book at one point where Seth is in a main event and he comes back and all they did was cheer for Becky, even though it was like a men's match. And he's just like, seems like they want you.
that was a good part too, because Seth was like being his classic pissy baby character about it. Even though it was his future wife, he was still like, well, I guess you win this one.
Right. And also too, what I don't think we give enough credit for is like, who else was very popular around this time that is also of Irish descent?
Finn Balor?
Not in wrestling.
Oh, I don't know who.
Conor McGregor. I feel like there was definitely a like.
You think everyone was on like an Irish kick at that point across combat sports?
I mean, her gimmick was effectively what Conor McGregor was in real life. Is just like an Irish person who doesn't give a shit about authority or anything, and walks around with a weird Vince McMahon-esque strut. But I feel like that. I think that's spitballing, but I believe that's a part of this that is also not really being acknowledged. Is like he was the most popular person in the world, like back then, and also like with Ronda plus that plus Give Divas a Chance plus like the crowd willing it really became a undeniable thing.
No, you're right. And you are very right that people certainly went crazy for it and made it happen, meaning Becky, main eventing WrestleMania. I think, in my memory, and I could be wrong about this, I could be misremembering, I felt like there was not... It didn't feel like it needed that, though. Like it certainly solidified... getting the main event, we'll say. Like, I don't think that would have got the main event if everyone wasn't so crazy for it. But I really think WWE was probably like, we really want to make a big women's star, Like, I think when it happened, like when Brian had it and, like, the other times where it's been this sort of organic thing, I think they maybe had to be cajoled a little bit into it. Like, we obviously don't want to do this, but we're going to have to because everyone wants it. I feel like this time... Maybe its spot on the card was variable, but I feel like they were not mad that Becky became this star. I think they were like, cool, like, great, wow, Becky's a star, like, fantastic, let's do something with this.
Yeah, and also I think it just helped that Ronda was at the height of her popularity. Becky became the most popular act in the company, and it's just like, like anything to help kind of fuel that. I mean, let's call Ronda what she is. It was a big marketing expense.
Yes.
Because it's not like, Ronda had great matches at times, fine matches at times. I think she tried her best on the mic and with character work. I don't know.
That's very nice of you to say that. What a sweet compliment.
Yeah. But she was a marketing expense to get people to give a shit. And so knowing that you have all these eyeballs, you kind of need, because like, they were ready to boost Charlotte for the same role until Becky just became undeniably popular. And it's like, well, we're not going to squander the fact that we have Ronda Rousey, like people watching because Ronda Rousey is the champion and this is like a big thing. So I feel like that's a big part of this too, where it's like, had this happened a year later or a year earlier, I don't, would this have been the same scenario? I don't know.
Yeah, Becky got very timing wise got lucky in the sense that Charlotte is just was never going to get that groundswell of love, or never be the underdog, certainly. And then Ronda at that point, though she was still an important character and like mattered, again, people weren't like, I think the bloom was off the rose a little bit there. Everyone was like, okay, like we're not mad at Ronda yet, but also like we get it, there wasn't a lot of evolution there, it was so
Right.
she was up against two people where it was like, I think everyone was like, yeah, like please, I'm like, and again, to Vince's wrestling only credit, he was like, we can build a huge baby face out of this, like against this sort of legendary, at the time Roman-esque, person we all love to boo because she's an unstoppable Terminator, and then also Ronda Rousey, who is this MMA legend that we can also feed to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's not demeaning Becky's work. Becky was incredible, but I do think like wrestling is a lot about timing too. Like people say this in all these books we read. Like you cool off, you heat up. Like they purposely cool you off for whatever reason. Like you got to be right place, right time to achieve the fame Becky has, to become as big as the man became. You need both sides of the equation, three sides of the equation, the office on your side, the fans on your side. Like there's a lot of variables that need to click into place to have that all come together that way.
Right, it's definitely a perfect storm situation. But and this is one of my final lingering questions after reading this thing is Becky a good wrestler?
Well, I will say we're gonna do a Becky match for our next watch along, so we can certainly dissect it in terms of one match. I do not think about Becky's matches and go, wow, what great matches those were. Like there's been a couple, like I recall that Charlotte, I think I watched that Charlotte Last Woman Standing at one point, and I was like, that was pretty good. The Mania main event is not very good. The one we're going to do, we're going to do the Mania triple threat. The other Mania triple threat was good, but like, I don't know. Is there even to an add-on is there a signature Becky match where you're like, this is the pinnacle of her talent showcase in this 20-minute showdown?
The only thing I can think of really is her versus Bianca a few years ago.
The one at the Mania one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably is the right answer, right?
Probably is. But also it's like, is that because Bianca is great and Becky is a better heel? Or you could unclear, but is that her signature match? I mean, the triple threat should be, and that's not a leading question. I honestly don't have that answer, but I ask it because of all of these high profile matches that we kind of reviewed in her book, and the fact that she questions if she's a good wrestler made me question if she's a good wrestler. So it almost like maybe think differently of her almost to a certain point.
Yeah, I would not classify her as a good wrestler in the technical sense for sure. Like as a Daniel Bryan, like who's like the best wrestler ever. So that's a high bar to clear. In terms of women, I mean when I think of really good women's matches of the last couple of years, meaning the last decade, we'll say, because that's like where they really started becoming something of note. I will say like the Bayley Sasha match, to one of the takeovers, which is regarded as probably the best one of the bunch. That's such a story match. It's a good match in the ring, and they both do great. And the intensity is really high, and the passion is really high. But it is in so many parts because they were such good polar opposite characters, And it was good in the sense that like Stone Cold versus The Rock is good, where you're like there is the build up here and the intensity and the enthusiasm where like all I need you to do in the ring is just sort of hit your spots and play your roles, and like we're gonna be into it, and the fans are so excited, like so you pick up on all that. I don't know if Becky really has a ton of moments like that. Like she sort of got neutered in the triple threat we talked about with Ronda and Charlotte, but that was doomed because it was the end of a 9-hour Mania. Ronda didn't really want to play ball. It sounds like Charlotte. Like it was always gonna be a tough sell in the ring, no matter what. I think.
Yeah, and one day, maybe the next episode when we talk about a classic Becky match, we can talk about how overbooked that whole triple threat with Ronda Rousey and
I
Charlotte
just
Flair
like I said,
was.
the McMahons got involved, which I forgot until I read this book, and I was like, what? Like, did they have to do this every fucking time?
She loses to Asuka and then goes into the Royal Rumble only because Lana gets injured. It's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, that's so stupid.
So
And it probably got. I remember getting a pop, so like they got their 5 seconds of enthusiasm around it. But I think most people were like, that was so, tight. They're so like sweaty, like why do we have to do it that way?
So you had a easy path and you made it so much muddier. But whatever. Yeah, we'll talk more about this.
We will, and I will say, this is not a masterpiece by any means, but we didn't even talk about this really, but I want to give Becky your props. The first half of this book or so, where she talks about her upbringing in Ireland and becoming a wrestler, and sort of how she went from sort of like a do-nothing teen to like a legitimate star who was in Japan for a little while and sort of became a sort of overnight sensation, that is incredibly good. Like, that to me feels like Becky genuinely having part of her story she wanted to tell, document, explain. Like, I love that. Like, we so many of these books we read, everyone feels an obligation to say, I was born in North Dakota, and then I did this, and then I went to wrestling school, and da-da-da-da-da. And it just gets so, you've heard it once, you've heard it a million times. So many of them are so repetitive. But this one, because she's from another country and just had a different experience, like, I just thought that was really well done. And you could, and the passion in her voice, talking about her family and her upbringing, I just think that was all great. Like, I think when we're getting to the nuts and bolts of her wrestling career, I do wish maybe she had more honesty and maybe time to ruminate on these things as opposed to writing about things that happened a couple of years ago. But I really did like the beginning a lot. And I think if you're going to read this book, you're going to, the first 30 to 40%, you're going to be like, this is great. And then the rest of it, you're going to be like, okay, this is fine.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, the first part of the book, she took her time, and the last part of the book, she sped through. And I wish there was a better balance of that pacing, but yeah, I can't disagree with what you just said. The beginning is very compelling and interesting, and her struggles with eating disorders and
sure, of course, mental health, eating disorders. Yes, she's very honest about all that stuff, and that's great. Yeah. That takes courage. So good for her. I will also note, because I think it is important to note, this book is weird about Vince McMahon. I don't think she had to censor herself, and she's speaking honestly about the man, and I guess that's, what I don't know what else we could ask her to do, but this book just came out in March, so like there was plenty of time to assess the Vince McMahon saga and legacy and everything, and she makes one mention that Vince retired, and mostly she showers him with praise. And I get that he granted her this life she never would have had otherwise, and all these opportunities. She met Seth, she had her child, she became a star. But it's just, for a woman in WWE to write this book and talk about Vince this way, I will just say that it was surprising to me the way she talks about him. And maybe she has no stories to tell in that regard, and I hope for her sake that she does not. But it was not necessarily like there was an aura of support and protection, for lack of a better term, around it that I just was not necessarily expecting.
Another thing she didn't really get into a whole lot, or was very vague about. So there probably could have been more.
Yeah,
more
but
critique.
Like I said, I hope by that point Vince was being not a absolute monster and creep to everybody, but just just. If there are stories there, this would have been a time to tell them, and but whatever. I understand that it's not her. She doesn't have to do it. She didn't do it in other parts of the book. So, like we said, she wasn't throwing shade or gossip or anything like that around a ton. But just an interesting tidbit in the wake of Vince being ousted as hard as you can be ousted finally from his creation. I just didn't expect it to come off the way it came off. But not a detriment to the book necessarily. Just something I said, interesting, curious. Tuck that away for mention on the podcast.
Which we will mention again, I'm sure, next episode.
But Walt, good book though. I think I'd call it a mild treat, a little sweet treat, like a little piece of candy.
A semi-sweet morsel.
Semi-sweet. One of the, like a cooking chocolate,
Chocolate chip, yes.
Yeah, you shouldn't eat it necessarily. It's better in food, but if you ate it, you wouldn't throw up. It would be like, it's just fine.
Yep. I think that's a perfect qualification of treat in this book.
Well, there you go. And like we said, we're going to do a Becky Lynch match next up on the show. So next episode in 2 weeks, join us again. We're going to watch Becky wrestle, and we will try and dissect the question even further of, is Becky a good wrestler with a capital W? So come back for that. If you want more on wrestling in general, our archives, books, we talk about a lot of books in the old days. Like we said, all those are available at awesometruth.libsyn.com. And subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts, and you can get old episodes, new ones, books aplenty, documentaries, the whole Awesome Truth world is available to you on that on all your favorite apps. So
the Awesome Truth universe, I think they call it.
Truth, yeah, the Awesome Truth universe is at your fingertips on your phone. So, Walt, good to talk about a book. Good to read a book. I don't know when we'll do this again. We have to
never do that again.
Yeah, like you said, I would love to read 30 pages of the Rhonda book and talk about that. So maybe as a follow up to this, if we can finagle that. Maybe we'll talk about Ronda someday and complete the other and get the other side of this story. See what Ronda has to say about her WrestleMania main event.
I'm sure she holds less back about Vince McMahon. That's for sure.
Based on the things I've read on blogs, I think she is very, very candid. So we'll see. Maybe that's next up someday down the line. But for now, more Becky to come in 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for listening. And remember, the truth will set you free.